Hi, I'm Imogen Robertson, author of Anatomy of Murder, and I'd like to show you some of the real places in London that feature in the book. So this is Bedfordbury. Covent Garden is that way, St Martin's Lane is that way. It was one of the dodgiest, most unpleasant parts of London when Anatomy of Murder is set. Imagine a slum made up of medieval buildings, all falling apart, many of them in danger of falling down any second, where several families crammed into a room together, or you could rent for a penny a night a bit of space on a mattress in one of the attics. People were complaining throughout the 18th century that once thieves disappeared into areas like this, that was it, they couldn't be found again. A couple of key scenes of Anatomy of Murder are set in this area at that time. So Rookery was a generic name for the really most hardcore slum areas of London. There was one here, there was another one by Smithfields, and that name comes from the verb to rook, which was to steal in the slang of the day, and of course because the birds have a reputation for taking shiny things. This is Berkeley Square, which is where Harriet Westerman is staying with her family for the duration of Anatomy of Murder. It is now, as it was then, one of the most exclusive addresses in London. It was far enough away from the stink of the city so that people could enjoy a bit of fresh air, but still close to the seats of power around Westminster and St James's. Mr Palmer appears just on the road, just behind me, where Bruton Street joins Berkeley Square, and it's from there that he watches Harriet's children at play in the central gardens, and ponders his strategy about how he's going to recruit Harriet and Crowther to his cause. Berkeley Square was originally laid out in the first half of the 18th century, though of course there's been a lot of bomb damage to it since. You can still see and get a real sense of the sorts of houses that were here when Harriet and Crowther were living here, and see a lot of those original Georgian details around the whole square. There have been some fantastic residents here, fictional as well as non-fictional. My favourite of the non-fictional was Horace Walpole, who had a house here for the last 15 years of his life, and is somebody I love because his letters that he wrote throughout the 18th century are one of the great sources for me for my books, to get a sense of the people and the characters of the time. Berkeley Square has also got one of the most famous haunted houses in London, which is just on the other side of the square there, where apparently a gentleman kept his lunatic brother in one of the attics, and still if you spend time up there you can go insane with fear of the ghost. Sounds like one of the stories from one of my books. I might have to use that sometime in the future. Other than my own characters, of course, my other favourite fictional character who lived in Berkeley Square was Bertie Wooster. Apparently it's very handy for the Drones Club. This is Her Majesty's Theatre in Haymarket, and it was on this site that the King's Theatre existed in the period of Anatomy of Murder. And it's on the King's Theatre that I've based my fictional opera theatre, His Majesty's. It was very closely associated with the Italian opera, as the opera house is in Anatomy of Murder. Handel premiered over 20 operas here in the sort of early to mid 18th century. Opera was a major fashion in London. Going to the opera house here and to the opera house in Covent Garden were absolute kind of staple of the social diary. Everybody went and everybody saw each other there. So they were sort of as much sort of social as artistic occasions. So instead of buses and taxis going up here, you'd have the gentry turning up in the coaches, we'd have people turning up in sedan chairs. The whole of the Haymarket would be choked with carriages from about 5 o'clock, and they used to issue instructions on their adverts for the performances to say which direction you should be driving your carriages in to drop people off. Such was the crush when the doors opened. So in 1781, when Anatomy of Murder was set, the season opened on the 17th of November, as it does in the novel, with an opera that involved a lead castrato singer. It's a kind of difficult thing for us to imagine now, what the sound of what a castrato must have been, because you had that range of the boy treble, but with years and years of musical training laid on top of it. Some of them became enormous stars. The guy who sang here in 1781, Pansarotti, he sung all over Italy. He retired a very wealthy gentleman to Padua. and died in the 1820s, loved and respected by all. One of the major themes of Anatomy of Murder is naval espionage in the late 18th century. We're on Whitehall now, and behind me is the old Admiralty building, which is called the Ripley Building. It was built in the 1720s, and it was from this building that Lord Sandwich was running the naval operations of the American War of Independence. It was arguably the first purpose-built office building in England, and contained boardrooms and staterooms for the Lords of the Admiralty. So the design wasn't much approved of. People thought it looked rather provincial. And so the portico was added by Robert Adam in 1769. Here that my character, Mr. Palmer, carries on his somewhat more shady duties as an employee of the Admiralty. In 1781, there was a major naval treason plot that ended with a surprise attack in which over 200 men were killed. The man responsible for supplying the French with that information was Francois-Henri de la Motte. He was executed on the 27th of July 1781, hung, drawn and quartered, and his heart was torn out and burnt in front of the cheering crowd. They took spying quite seriously in those days.